Resuming debate, reprise de débat, the honourable member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today we are discussing an act respecting cannabis to amend the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, the Criminal Code, and other acts. The intention of C-45 is to legalize marijuana. This bill has numerous objectives. However, unfortunately, many of those pertaining to public health and public safety will not be achieved. This bill fails to protect the health of young persons by restricting their access to cannabis, fails to deter illicit activities in relation to cannabis, and fails to reduce the burden on the criminal justice system. With the Liberal government's rushed deadline, law enforcement will not have the time or resources to train or prepare for the legalization of marijuana. Doctors are extremely concerned about the well-being of youth if this legislation is passed, as marijuana can be an extremely harmful substance. Numerous municipal and provincial governments will also not have the time or resources to respond to the tremendous impact that C-45 will have on all Canadian communities. Over 68,000 police officers in Canada will need specific training in the wake of this monumental legislation, and a few months is not a realistic timeline. As a result, the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police has asked the government to extend this deadline. If police are not prepared to deal with the legalization through adequate training, this can lead to poor decisions, resulting in bad case law for any new legislation. We want our law enforcement to have the ability to properly uphold the law. Police will require final legislation from all the levels of government before being able to begin their preparations. The government needs to provide police with a clear direction regarding both funding and training. The bill is also of grave concern for anyone on Canadian roads, as law enforcement are also lacking the resources to deal with marijuana-impaired driving. There are no current reliable roadside testing methods to measure marijuana impairment, as there is presently with alcohol. This is extremely challenging from a public safety perspective. One of the purposes of this legislation is to ease the burden on law enforcement, but it is likely that it will in fact do the opposite. Although there may be fewer charges of simple possession, those efforts will be replaced by those needed for ticketing. There are also severe concerns with home growing and allowing the possession of up to 4 plants. This will be extremely difficult to enforce. Jurisdictions such as Colorado in the United States, who have already legalized marijuana, have seen tremendous difficulties with this, especially with individuals selling their homegrown marijuana for a lower price than what is legally regulated. This is problematic as it won't incentivize the elimination of a black market. Some elements of plain packaging could further hinder the enforcement of the black market, as it will be very difficult for law enforcement to identify between legal and illegal marijuana products. Youth access to marijuana is another grave concern. It has been medically confirmed that there are severe long-term effects from marijuana use by youth, such as cognitive delays, as well as mental health issues. All of these are likely to affect their goals in school, as well as future careers. Smoking marijuana doubles the risk of developing schizophrenia, which is especially worrying for those who are already at a greater risk. These risks don't just stop at the age of 18 when one becomes an adult either, but rather can be experienced up till the age of 25. There needs to be increased awareness on these risks for those 25 and under, and not those just under the legal age. Research suggests that youth typically begin use in a social setting and don't recognize it as harmful. Youth also perceive the risks of marijuana impairment when driving to be minimal. The government should not be dismissive of the evidence we have seen in Colorado after they legalized marijuana. The state experienced drastic increases in deaths caused by marijuana-impaired driving. It is crucial for youth to be informed of the facts of these dangerous realities and not be relying on myths and word of mouth. Having homegrown marijuana is also a substantial risk to youth, as it is easily accessible through the home. Despite provisions to restrict youth access, marijuana use by youth was frequent, and most of the marijuana was obtained originally bought from legal sources. This is particularly concerning in relation to the production of edibles. Although they have been excluded from this bill, they are likely to be produced privately by individuals or even sold on the black market. With marijuana more easily accessible through legalization, edibles will be more prevalent. When marijuana is put in food, children may mistake them for delicious treats, which can be extremely dangerous. I would like to note that Quebec's legislation for marijuana will forbid homegrown cannabis for personal use, for likely just those reasons. The province of New Brunswick is also addressing the dangers of homegrown marijuana by making individuals lock up their plants. Provinces and municipalities are creating legislation in anticipation of C-45, but it is evident they don't have the resources or infrastructure to deal with its implementation by July 1st, 2018. This is why the province of Quebec also recently asked the federal government to extend the deadline to 2019. There are a number of indirect results of legalizing marijuana, and municipalities will need to be prepared to deal with additional medical costs due to more emergency room visits, as well as poison center calls. Areas that previously legalized marijuana also saw significant increases in homelessness as well as crime as a direct result. We shouldn't be rushing this bill through, but rather taking our time so we can learn from those who have already legalized this substance so we don't make the same mistakes. We need more time to fully implement this legislation and minimize the risks to public safety. There are also significant international ramifications from implementing this bill. Canada won't be complying with 3 United Nations treaties and may cause disputes with our southern neighbor, the United States. Officials at the United States border crossings have asked individuals whether they have consumed marijuana, and if yes, individuals have been denied entry. This can be very problematic when marijuana is considered legal and individuals, as a result of its use, are being denied entry into the U.S. This issue remains unresolved. Madam Speaker, this bill is extremely worrisome as it contains some major oversights. The Standing Committee on Health heard numerous witnesses in relation to C-45, and the government failed in many areas to implement their recommendations. There are concerns from reputable organizations such as the Canadian Medical Association, as well as the Canadian Chiefs of Police. Madam Speaker, if my colleagues across the floor were concerned about the well-being of Canadians, they would not be putting this bill forward. I ask my colleagues in the House to stand up for the public safety of all Canadians and vote against this bill. Thank you.